You're already married, aren't you? Going back to your parents' house is just too soft. If you go back, don't ever come back to this house again. Kanae yells this as she blocks my path after hearing that my dad got injured and I was planning to go back home. I just nodded silently. Understood. I won't come back, so I'll go home to my parents. My name is Jessie. Louis, my husband, and I have been together since middle school, and we ended up marrying each other. We've only had eyes for each other since our first love. Both our parents were thrilled with how well we got along, and it helped that they were friends since we're from the same hometown. The reason we moved into Louis' family's house after getting married was because they had a spacious home with extra rooms. We got married right after college and had been saving money appropriately for our age. But both sets of parents told us it would be fine to live together until we saved up some more money. So we ended up living in Louis' family home where a room was waiting for us. Both Louis and I were exhausted from adjusting to our new lives when we started our first jobs. We felt grateful that we could live with his family. My in-laws treated me like their own daughter, and there was absolutely no issue in mine and Louis' married life. That is, until Lyra came back home. Lyra is Louis' older sister, 2 years his senior. She had been mean to me ever since I started dating Louis in middle school. She said things like I wasn't good enough for him, or that he had poor taste. Louis always defended me and wondered why Lyra would say such things. Lyra worked for a company that required her to relocate, and she moved to the city shortly after starting her job. One of the reasons I agreed to move into Louis' family home was because Lyra wasn't there. Another reason I agreed to live in Louis' family home was because Lyra wasn't around. If Lyra had still been living there, I would have flat out refused to move in. However, as fate would have it, Lyra was reassigned to our hometown. When I shared my concerns with Louis, he said, "Lyra is an adult now. She won't say anything weird." True, the times Lyra bullied me were back in high school. After she went to college, she rarely came home, and we stopped running into each other even when I visited the family home. At our wedding, although she didn't speak to me, I remember seeing Lyra crying. It made me think maybe we could get along, but that was a big mistake. After returning home, Lyra acted normally toward me in front of Louis and his parents. I thought maybe she had matured and her edginess was gone. But then, one day when I luckily had some time off, I was enjoying a book in my room. Lyra, who also happened to be off that day, walked into my and Louis' room without knocking. "Hey, how long are you gonna laze around? Could you hurry up and make some food? I'm hungry." Lyra wore a look she'd never show in front of Louis or his parents. Taken aback by Lyra's eyes, filled with what seemed like hatred, I put down my book and said, "All right, let's make some food," and headed to the kitchen. Drinking in the middle of the day, Lyra acted as though I should naturally be the one cooking. She'd never acted this way when Louis and his parents were around. Feeling deceived, wondering if she'd been hiding her true self all this time, I quickly made lunch. Lyra took one bite, then stood up with her plate. "There's no way I can eat something this terrible. Jessie, why did you even marry Louis? He really doesn't know how to pick 'em. Poor guy." Glaring at me, Lyra took her plate straight to the trash. She threw away the food I had made right in front of me. "Go buy some alcohol. After eating your awful cooking, it feels like my tongue is rotting. I want to disinfect it with alcohol, so go get some now." I was pretty steamed, but I had planned on going shopping anyway, so I got her some alcohol. To spite her, I bought non-alcoholic beer. Lyra was furious. I retorted, "Don't treat me like a minion," which escalated into an argument. Still mad, Lyra retreated to her room. When Louis came home, she instantly switched back to her gentle demeanor, a quick change that sent shivers down my spine. That night, I discussed Lyra with Louis, but for some reason, his attitude was cold. Lately, every time he looks at me, his expression is complicated. We used to always share the double bed, but now he's sometimes sleeping on the living room couch. When I asked why, he said, "Just couldn't sleep, so I stayed in the living room." I've been wondering what's going on ever since. I was saddened by his sudden coldness. When Louis said, "Instead of blaming Lyra, don't you think you have some things to reflect on yourself?" I couldn't help but tear up. Since middle school, Louis has always been kind to me, and yet I've been troubled lately by his sudden coldness. Being mistreated by Lyra, and now feeling this coldness from Louis, felt like salt being rubbed into an emotional wound. I couldn't help but cry. Louis looked surprised, but he didn't comfort me. Seeming perplexed, he paced around for a bit before sitting down next to me, who was sitting on the bed with a determined look on his face. "There's something I've been meaning to ask, but haven't." "What is it? Are you having an affair?" I was so surprised by the sudden mention of affair that my tears stopped. I swear my heart has never strayed from Louis. Shaking my head, I say, "No, I'm not. Why would you ask something like that?" Louis then shows me a picture on his phone. The picture shows me talking to a man who has his hand on my shoulder. Both the man and I are smiling, but this is by no means a photo of infidelity. "You're mistaken. Look closely. Yeah, he's put on some weight, but that's Andy, our classmate. Don't you remember him? He was on the baseball team. This was taken when we bumped into each other after so long, and he said, 'You look well,' and patted my shoulder." Louis zooms in on the photo and says, "Really? Andy?" with a skeptical look. Frowning and looking closely at the man's face, Louis asks, "Is that really Andy? Andy is getting married soon. There's no way I'd have an affair. Why would you even suspect that?" "Well, Lyra sent me this picture saying you were cheating. She also said she saw you coming home late with Andy recently, and then she sent me this photo." "Why would you believe Lyra over me? Is that why you've been cold to me?" "Sorry, you have been coming home late and I was worried. I've become a senior at work too, so sometimes I come home late because I'm teaching my colleagues." "I see. Oh, thank goodness. I'm really sorry." Louis breathes a sigh of relief. Slightly tapping his back as a little payback for doubting me, I say, "Geez." Louis says, "Sorry," and apologizes again. From then on, Louis changed his attitude and started treating me kindly like he used to. It was good to get back to being a loving couple, but my distrust towards Lyra increased. I became convinced that Lyra wanted to kick me out of this home for some reason, so I started wondering how to expose her true colors in front of my in-laws. On another day when Lyra and I both had time off, Lyra came and demanded that I make lunch like she used to. "Why can't you be considerate? Do you know what time it is? Hurry up and make lunch," she says, but it's only 10 a.m. It feels too early for lunch to me. "Lyra, you could make something if you want. You cook on your days off, don't you?" "What? Cooking is a wife's job, isn't it? I only do chores to keep the family harmony, you know." Just as I'm getting frustrated with Lyra urging me to cook, my phone rings. Ignoring Lyra, who's been drinking since the morning, I answer the call. My mom's voice comes through, sounding urgent. "Jesse? Oh, thank goodness you picked up. Your dad's in trouble. He tripped at the front door and seems to have hurt his ankle." I can tell from my mom's voice she's really flustered, and I sense this is an emergency for my parents. "I'm coming right now, just wait," I say as I hang up the phone and start to get ready. Lyra, who told me to cook, now looks annoyed as she sees me getting ready to go out and says, "What are you doing?" "It looks like my dad got injured, so I'm going to my parents' house." "What? You're married now, aren't you? Going back to your parents' house is too lenient. If you're going home, don't bother coming back here." I couldn't take it anymore, standing in front of Lyra who was blocking my way out. Why do I have to deal with this kind of spiteful attitude? I was absolutely fed up with being treated so unfairly by Lyra. "Fine, I won't come back. I'll go to my parents' house," I state calmly, and Lyra steps aside with a pleased expression. "Don't ever come back!" Lyra cheerfully sees me off at the door, her alcohol stench unbearable. Rushing back home, I found my dad's ankle was severely bruised. Mom was visibly panicked, so I drove him to the hospital where they confirmed it was a severe sprain. Due to the condition, my dad had no choice but to use crutches, so I decided to stay with my parents for a while. I thought this was a good opportunity, especially since Lyra had told me not to come back. I informed Louie and my in-laws over the phone about my dad's injury and my strained relationship with Lyra, letting them know that I'd be staying at my parents' home for a while. My in-laws said they would talk some sense into Lyra. Louie then said, "Well, I'll come live at your family's home too." My parents get along well with Louie, so they were pleased, albeit a bit apologetic for the inconvenience. I received a text from Lyra saying, "Why would you tell my parents? Aren't you embarrassed to tattle like a child?" I just read it and ignored it. It seems Louie got a text from Lyra saying, "Aren't you coming back? Living at Jesse's family home must be tough." Louie responded, "I'll go where Jesse is," and we didn't hear from Lyra after that. My dad's recovery was slower than expected. He spent about 3 months on crutches and in a wheelchair. My dad seemed both grateful and happy for Louie's various help around the house. Just when I was feeling grateful for being married to Louie, Lyra sent a shocking message my way. "I'm bringing my boyfriend over. Since you're technically my sister-in-law, you have permission to come home for just 1 day. Be polite and greet him properly. Don't say anything unnecessary." I felt repulsed by the selfishness of her text, but the message Lyra sent to Louie was even more off-putting. Her message said, "My boyfriend is coming to greet the family, so come home, Louie. I might be getting married, but you'll always be important to me." Louie commented, "Lyra's texts are always so poetic, aren't they?" But thanks to my woman's intuition, I had a good idea of how Lyra really felt about Louie. To protect Louie and our marriage, I decided to turn this meeting into a stage for my revenge, regardless of how Lyra's boyfriend might feel. After being allowed to return to my in-laws' house after a long time, I received multiple apologies from them. They told me Lyra was going to pick up her boyfriend and that they'd make sure she apologized to me afterwards. "Oh, it's fine as long as Lyra stops being malicious. That's all I really want," I replied with a genuine smile. Plus, I'm sure that after my revenge, Lyra won't dare to be nasty to me anymore. The man Lyra brought with her seemed serious enough, but what shocked Louie and my in-laws the most was how much he looked like Louie. From the aura to the facial features, they were identical, leaving my in-laws exchanging surprised glances. It was clear that Lyra's boyfriend also noticed the resemblance. As he stood there in surprise, Lyra cheerfully said, come on in." Louie whispered to me, "Isn't that guy way too similar to me?" "I told you so, didn't I?" was my reply. I had let Louie know beforehand that I was planning some revenge. Louie had told me I didn't have to go that far, but when I explained my reasons, he seemed torn between believing me or not. However, after seeing the guy's face, Louie seemed to finally understand why I felt the need for revenge. Though the awkward expression on Louie's face showed his mixed feelings, my resolve to make Lyra learn her lesson the hard way was reaffirmed. "My name is Jackson. I'm considering marriage with Lyra. Nice to meet you all." My in-laws welcomed Jackson's polite introduction with smiles. Lyra seemed really happy and started downing drinks like there's no tomorrow. Jackson, who had seemed a little tense, started to relax more, thanks to my in-laws' warm demeanor. As we all were engaged in light conversation, a tipsy Lyra rested her head on Louie's shoulder, not Jackson's. "Ah, this is fun. Louie, you must be feeling lonely, huh, knowing that I'm getting married?" "No, not at all. You know, Jackson here looks just like Louie. That's why I thought about getting married." The resemblance between Jackson's face and Louie's had been the elephant in the room, something nobody had mentioned until now. But Lyra, probably due to being intoxicated, not only brought it up but also revealed that it was her reason for considering marriage. The atmosphere changes immediately as Lyra's words turn my in-laws' faces pale. Lyra, realizing she may have said too much, tries to laugh it off. "Just kidding!" But I didn't let this opportunity slip away. "Lyra, you can't be serious." Before my father-in-law can say anything more, I interrupt. I can't bear to let this sad tale come from my in-laws' mouths, and more importantly, I need Lyra to realize that Louie is my husband, not just a family friend. "Jackson, did you know?" I hate to spill family secrets, but Lyra and Louie are not actually blood related. My in-laws had children from previous marriages and then got remarried. "What?" He looks at Lyra in surprise. Lyra quickly puts distance between herself and Louis and glares at me. Undeterred, I take out my phone and place it on the table. I've had my suspicions for a while. Lyra has been treating me poorly, and I've wondered why. As I say this, I press the play button on the voice recorder app on my phone. What flows out are the sounds of Lyra berating me. The recording is filled with Lyra's desperate voice saying things like, "Break up with Louis," and "Leave this house." Realizing the gravity of the situation, my in-laws utter in despair, "This can't be." But I turn to Lyra, who is now biting her lip and pale as a ghost, and give her a smile. "Lyra, you've had feelings for Louis for a long time, haven't you? That's why you've been trying to drive me away." "No, that's not it. Louis is my precious younger brother." "Then why did you plan to marry Jackson because he looks like Louis?" "Well, that's... Jackson, you told me that you met Lyra in a bar, right? What was that encounter like?" Caught off guard by the sudden question, Jackson replies with a trembling voice, "We met while I was drinking at a bar. She told me she liked my face. That's how it all started." My mother-in-law lets out a sorrowful, "Oh," and starts to cry, while my father-in-law looks at Lyra with a serious expression. Lyra's biological father, my father-in-law, finally broke his silence. "Lyra, did you have feelings for Louis?" The heartfelt greeting I had prepared for Lyra's future husband was because I'd realized she had her sights set on Louis. Although Lyra herself never admitted it, her behavior over time made it increasingly obvious that she saw Louis not just as a brother, but as a man. While I had hoped it wasn't true, I grew more and more certain that their relationship was more than sibling affection. Suddenly, Lyra bursts into tears and buries her face in the table. "I couldn't help it. I've loved him ever since our parents got married when I was in elementary school, and I met Louis. There are stories like this in girls' comics, you know, where the parents remarry and their children start dating. I had always dreamed that would happen with Louis and me, and then you came along and stole him." Jackson, listening to Lyra's tearful outburst, starts to complain of a headache and says he's leaving. Lyra clung to Jackson, but her father intervened, saying he'd go apologize to Jackson later. Lyra was clearly distraught, crying uncontrollably, but neither Louis nor I could do anything to console her. "Lyra, I've always seen you as a real sister, but that's all it's ever been." With those words, Louis addressed Lyra, who was sobbing uncontrollably. For a moment, her cries quieted down, but then she burst into loud, childlike sobs again. I felt some pity, but it didn't change the fact that Lyra had been mean to me. Relieved that I had gotten my revenge, and that Lyra would no longer be pursuing Louis, we left for my parents' home. Later, we learned that Lyra had been diagnosed with alcohol dependency at the hospital. She was also found to be mentally unstable and had taken time off work to isolate herself. After talking it over with my in-laws, Louis and I finally decided to move out and start our life together. My in-laws kept apologizing to me, but I told them there was no need. Love can make people do crazy things, after all. I couldn't forgive what Lyra had done, but I did feel sorry for her. I hope she can move on from her feelings for Louis and find a new direction in life. Louis and I got off to a great start living together. We rented a house close to both our parents so we could easily help them if needed. Starting this new chapter brought back the excitement we felt as newlyweds. Louis and I plan to continue being a loving couple and live happily ever after.
My name is Heather. After graduating from college, I landed a full-time job at a cafe. The company I joined had branches all over the country, and I had to relocate to various places, regardless of the season or duration. In my 6 years of working there, I moved 3 times. While everyone around me was getting married, I remained single, and my parents started worrying about my future, asking, "Do you plan to stick with this job forever?" One day, while I was at the bar, I happened to run into Anna, a regular customer. I was venting my concerns about marriage during our conversation, and she suggested, How about meeting my brother sometime? I thought it was a joke because we had been drinking, but she was serious. The conversation progressed, and I ended up meeting her brother Mark. That was how we first crossed paths. Anna and I got along really well, and it was no difference with Mark, her brother. We started dating soon after, and around 6 months into our relationship, he proposed to me. I was overjoyed, but also overwhelmed by anxiety. Marrying him meant quitting my current job. Since his company didn't require any more transfers, I would be staying in one place. His family lived nearby, and his income could comfortably support both of us. So he wanted me to quit my job after marriage. It seemed like there was never an option for him to relocate for me. I also thought it would be challenging to continue my current job with irregular shifts, considering the possibility of having children in the future. Still, I couldn't help but feel reluctant to let go of what I had built up until now. I needed to make a decision. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and then accepted the ring he offered. 13 years have passed since then, and I have spent those years regretting that decision almost every day. The first few years of our marriage seemed good, but everything changed after our son Ken was born. Mark became constantly irritable when he was at home, adopting an arrogant attitude. With me struggling with unfamiliar childcare and chronic sleep deprivation, household chores started piling up. At first, he said, "I know it's tough." But as time passed, his dissatisfaction grew. One day, after I fell asleep without waiting for him to return from a drinking outing, his attitude took a sharp turn. He looked down at me and said, "Who do you think supports your life? You're only taking care of the child, and you laze around." From that day onwards, he completely withdrew his cooperation in childcare, making it a one-woman show. With no family nearby, I couldn't ask for help. Ken's incessant night cries and my chronic lack of sleep caused headaches and dizziness. At times, I even considered going back to my parents' place, but I hadn't made the choice to be with Mark and live in this town. I couldn't show weakness, so I held back. During those tough days, Anna and my in-laws became my pillars of support. Anna and I maintained a close relationship even after I married Mark, and she visited us once a month since Ken was born. My in-laws also adored Ken, and they frequently visited our home, reading to him and playing with him. Their house was just a 15-minute drive away, so it was convenient. The house we lived in was a gift from my in-laws when I was pregnant. While I initially declined their offer, they explained that they had planned to purchase their barrier-free house from the beginning, considering our future together. Since they would eventually live with us, the house was under my father-in-law's name. While they looked after Ken, I could take care of the household chores, and chatting with my parents became a great way to relieve stress. I was very grateful for their visit. However, Mark felt differently. He didn't like the idea of his parents visiting, and indirectly expressed his disapproval. They got the hint, and they eventually stopped coming to our house. Despite this, they still invited me and Ken. Around the time Ken entered the 2nd grade, he expressed a desire to play Little League Baseball. He loved playing catch with his dad, and when he heard that one of his classmates had joined a baseball team, he wanted to as well. I had always wanted to let my child pursue their interests, but I couldn't immediately fulfill Ken's wish. Joining a baseball team required not only a membership fee, but also money for equipment, uniforms, and monthly fees. We didn't have the financial resources for it, despite the fact that we should have been able to save a substantial amount each month with no rent and Mark's income. Our savings were almost non-existent. Mark frequently went out drinking and spent money recklessly. Drinking itself wasn't an issue, but he wanted to show off, frequently inviting a few of his junior colleagues and covering their expenses. Ken wants to play Little League Baseball, I said, handing him a paper with the cost listed. Mark glanced at the paper briefly and replied,
"How are you planning to come up with all that money? You know we don't have that kind of cash."
He said it with a cold tone. Anticipating his reaction, I decided to share what I had been thinking all along. "I'm thinking about getting a job." He frowned unhappily, but reluctantly agreed as long as I didn't neglect the housework. 6 months after I started working, we finally saved enough money to let Ken join the baseball team. Although my responsibility increased with laundry and driving him to practices, Ken became more energetic and alive, practicing his swings, playing catch with friends, and constantly discussing baseball. Just seeing his smile made it all worthwhile. However, this new life brought its own set of problems. Mark didn't appreciate my income. I chose to work part-time at the same cafe I used to work at as a full-time employee. Even though I had been away for a while, I quickly advanced after finishing my training because I was familiar with the place. Mark didn't expect me to earn much during the short time Ken was at school. When he saw the numbers in my budget spreadsheet, he was astonished.
"You're making this much?"
He exclaimed. "Yeah, but after setting aside money for Ken's baseball and future savings, there's hardly anything left," I explained. But he turned away and headed to his room without a word. From that point on, his attitude worsened rapidly. I was treated like a housemaid, and he frequently raised his voice at our son. He used divorce as a threat and often said unreasonable things. But I knew my income alone wasn't enough to support Ken and I, so I had to comply with whatever my husband demanded to protect my son. Then, after nearly 2 years of Ken playing baseball, something happened. Mark took Ken's baseball bat and slammed it against the walls and floor, breaking it. It happened on my payday, and Mark was already in a bad mood. But that day, he seemed even angrier. As soon as he came home, he threw his bag, plopped onto the couch, and yelled,
"Hey, where's dinner?"
Since I was in the middle of preparing for the next day's youth baseball, I said, "Hold on a second." Then he replied,
"Who do you think is providing for us? And Ken can play baseball because of me. You must make me your first priority."
Startled by his loud voice, but also very annoyed by his previous words, I retorted, "But I manage the baseball expenses with my salary." He fell silent, grabbed Ken's baseball bat from his bag, and started smashing it against the wall. I instinctively covered my head with my hands and shrank as small as possible. When the noise stopped, I cautiously opened my eyes to find a large crack in the bat lying in front of me, and he was glaring at me intensely, saying,
"Don't get cocky just because of some part-time job."
I looked at him and realized it was time to end it. My pain wasn't about ending the marriage. It was about the broken bat before me. The bat I had bought with hard-earned money in between my busy schedule. The bat Ken had cherished. To think I had spent over a decade with someone who would resort to anger like this left me feeling empty. Despite my mixed emotions, he continued,
"You won't really go through with a divorce. You will be the one in trouble if we divorce. I dare you.
He said with a smirk, handing me over divorce papers. This wasn't the first time he has done this. In fact, he has done this countless times before. I never thought I would actually accept them, but this time, I took them without hesitation. Enough of being made a fool of. I gathered my essentials, my wallet, phone, and such, and left the house with Ken. As soon as we were out, I told Ken that if I went back to my parents' house after the divorce, he would have to quit the baseball team. Plus, there was no guarantee we could continue living as before. However, my son said, "Mom, it's not your fault. The one at fault is that guy," clearly angry at his father. Then he added, "I can play baseball anywhere, and when I enter middle school, I can join the baseball team." I thought he was still a small kid that needed my support, but I didn't realize he had grown up enough to say such things. I went straight to the city hall and submitted the divorce papers. Once they were accepted, I suddenly felt calm, but anxiety about what to do next overwhelmed me. Going back to my parents' house at this hour was difficult. Besides, I only had the bare minimum of belongings, and there were Ken's school, baseball, and my part-time job to consider. I didn't know where to start or what to do today. Sensing my anxiety, Ken said, "Why don't we go to Grandpa and Grandma's house?" I hesitated, thinking about relying on my in-laws after the divorce. But after much deliberation, I called them. I explained that I had divorced Mark and shared the reasons behind it, as well as my concerns about the future. My in-laws responded, "Come to our house right away." Upon arriving at their place, they apologized profusely. "We feel horrible for making you and Ken go through hard times because of our stupid son." She was in tears. After putting Ken to bed, I gave them the details of what had happened. Then Anna arrived, probably because my in-laws had invited her. She was angry, saying, "What a bonehead my brother is!" Both my in-laws and Anna sided with me and Ken, not with their son Mark. When I recounted everything that Mark had done and said in the past, and what happened today, my father-in-law raised his voice and said,
"Call Mark. We will straighten him out."
It was already close to 11 p.m., but Anna immediately called him and told him to come over. Perhaps because Anna, who was usually easygoing, used a stern tone, Mark didn't dare to resist. He arrived at my in-laws' place soon after. Their house had a large rectangular table with enough seating for 4 on each side. So Anna, myself, my father-in-law and my mother-in-law sat on one side, while on the opposite side, Mark sat alone, resulting in a 4-to-1 setup. When he arrived, he looked pale and nervous. My father-in-law, speaking in a calm but very low voice, asked Mark,
"Don't you have anything to say to Heather?"
Mark, trembling, replied,
"It's about me and Heather. It's none of your business, Dad."
Then, not only my father-in-law, but also my mother-in-law and Anna started berating him simultaneously.
"Enough of this!
You apologize to Heather right now. Do you even realize what you have done?" Suddenly Mark, who had been timid just moments ago, became assertive. He directed his anger at me and said,
You don't think you can act all high and mighty just because you have my family on your side. You can't survive on your own anyway. I might consider forgiving you if you apologize now."
He could have ended this mess if he had apologized. But despite this situation, he continued to look down on me, which left me speechless. There is no forgiving or turning back. I've already submitted the divorce papers. I confronted him with a dose of reality. His eyes widened in disbelief, and he shouted,
What? What the hell did you do?
He yelled and pounded his fist on the table. Then my father-in-law intervened, saying,
You are not the one to be asking that question. What the hell did you do to Heather and Ken?
He raised his voice even louder and emphasized,
We have heard everything.
In response, Mark glared at me and muttered.
You're despicable.
Then my father-in-law spoke again.
The despicable one is you. You look down on your own wife just because you're working, and you have left everything including Ken to her. You even make her work a part-time job, and you broke the vow that Ken treasured.
He raised his voice.
Dad, just shut up. No, I can stay quiet. Apologize to her.
This kind of back and forth between father and son continued for a while. Mark eventually grew impatient and said,
If Heather is so much better than your own son, why don't you just live with her? I can live on my own. I don't need anyone's help.
Hearing this, his father glared at him, saying,
All right then.
Mark hesitated for a moment and said,
Whatever.
Then, as if on cue, Anna happily chimed in. Well, maybe I should live with Heather too? Even my mother-in-law added, You should start preparing for the move. Seemingly supportive of Anna's idea. Mark was stunned by their responses, perhaps thinking his mother would stop Anna from moving in. He started getting flustered, saying,
Wait, you guys.
But then his father said,
What? You just said we could live with Heather.
He stammered,
Wait a minute.
but all three of them replied in union.
No, it's settled.
Finally realizing his situation, Mark turned to me as if pleading.
Can't you reconsider?
I coldly dismissed him, saying, There's no way I will reconsider, and brought up the topic of child support. He protested,
Why do I have to pay child support?
but his father promptly replied,
It's only natural that you will pay.
and he fell silent. I was surprised when his father later offered to put the house we had lived in under my name. Of course, Mark objected, saying,
So where am I supposed to live then? Give me this house if you are giving Heather that one.
However, his father insisted.
You said you could live on your own. We've already decided to sell this house. Since you can live on your own, you can figure it out yourself.
Then he delivered the final blow, saying,
If there is anything you need in the house, gather it by morning. Everything else will be disposed of.
And so, Ken and I, and what had now become my ex-in-laws, my ex-father-in-law, ex-mother-in-law, and Anna, began living together. Explaining this complicated situation to others is not easy, and it seemed like my parents thought I had gone crazy when they heard the story. But for now, we are managing to live well. Ken continues to go to school without transferring, and he's still on the baseball team, maintaining his usual lifestyle. I work as a contract employee with no relocations. Even if I have to wake up early or work late into the night, my ex-mother-in-law takes care of the housework and chores, so I'm grateful for that. Mark lost his place to live and rented an apartment, but now he has to pay rent and child support for Ken. He can't freely spend money as he used to. His juniors, who were once interested in him for his generosity, have left him, and it seemed like he's spending his mundane days just commuting between an empty home and work.